Science, Technology, and Transportation, written and directed by Andrew Atkinson and Luke Summers. Essential question: what was the extent to which science and technology brought change to the period from 1900 to um, the present? As time passed throughout the 20th and 21st century, the world experienced a tech boom. Some new inventions from the time include the cell phone, the internet, the telephone, the television, the radio, and the computer. All these new inventions helped to shape the new modern world that we have come accustomed to. Along with all these inventions, the world experienced a boom in how goods got shipped across the world, with every country starting to globalize. The invention of airplanes helped to ship goods and people at a faster rate than ever before. Along with the airplanes, massive ships containing shipping containers could carry more cargo than airplanes could ever, albeit at a slower rate. The Internet. The Internet was possibly the biggest change that we have experienced in the 20th and 21st century. First invented in the 1960s, it was first used for the military and defense of the US and was called ARPANET. ARPANET's creator was Vint Cerf and DARPA. What the Internet changed was the fundamental way we communicate, from the mail in the physical form becoming virtually obsolete to a whole library of information just a click away at a time. The Internet has both been a blessing and a curse. Social media. From the mid-2000s, the rise of social media has become a social phenomenon. With platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, Pinterest, and YouTube, almost everyone is connected. Social media lets people have a glimpse of people's lives from just a few pictures at a time. With ads on various medias like Instagram and YouTube, people have started to make a career out of being an Instagram influencer or an entertainer on YouTube. However, many psychologists have suggested that it's a good idea to limit the amount of time you have on social media, as it can have negative mental health consequences. The Green Revolution. The Green Revolution started in Latin America after the people there started to see that less and less food was getting to people who needed it. It started out in Latin/Central America and eventually spread down to South America as well. The revolution's goal was to make more food for the ever-growing population by modernizing the farming practices that hadn't changed for centuries. However, critics of the revolution say that the new practices haven't done anything for the people, and the population just continues to climb without enough food for everyone. Irrigation. Irrigation is the manipulation of water from streams or other bodies of water to be redirected to flow through farmland so that the land is always wet and fertile. Irrigation is one of the most ancient practices, dating back to the ancient Egypts, or to almost the ancient Egyptians. Without irrigation, humanity would not be where it is today, because without irrigation, we wouldn't have most of the ancient societies like the ancient Greeks and Egyptians. Irrigation was used by most ancient civilizations hundreds of years ago, but today, irrigation is still used in the modern world using reservoirs, tanks, and wells to supply water to crops. Crossbreeding consists of breeding two separate species of a plant or animal so that they produce a different product. Often, Livestock and plants are crossbred so that they produce offspring with bigger muscles, bigger leaves, or less of the bad parts of the plant or animal. The process is very common on farms and plantations to produce the maximum yield. The practice of crossbreeding goes back as far as when humans started practicing agriculture. Genetic engineering. Similar to crossbreeding, genetic engineering is essentially crossbreeding but without the middleman. Instead of altering an organism's genetic makeup by selective breeding, we physically manipulate the organism's DNA/RNA to be pretty much whatever we want with many stipulations. Some examples of successful genetic engineering is onions that don't make you cry, purple tomatoes, and carrots that help prevent osteoporosis. First discovered in 1973 by two biochemists, Stanley N. Cohn and Herbert W. Boyer. However, the father to genetic engineering is considered to be Paul Berg. Nuclear power. Nuclear power is power that is generated from nuclear fission inside of a reactor. Nuclear energy is considered to be one of the cleanest forms of energy that we have, with its only issue being meltdowns. Meltdowns are rare, but when they do happen, the fallout is often catastrophic. Some of the worst have been Chernobyl and Fukushima. In agriculture, radioactive materials are used to improve food crops, preserve food, and control insect pests. We have been using nuclear energy since 1958. Fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are fuels that come from the ground, usually coal. Fossil fuels have been the main way that we have powered our world for centuries and are used from cars to trains to planes to ships. Recently, fossil fuels have been under attack because of the danger they pose for the environment, and more people are switching to electric or renewable energy. Companies like Tesla are trying to figure out ways to make transportation less impactful on the environment by reducing carbon emissions. Greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases are gases that are released into the atmosphere from burning fossil fuels. Greenhouse gases have many different negative environmental and health effects. They cause climate change by trapping heat in the atmosphere, which causes Earth to heat up. And they also contribute to respiratory disease from smog and air pollution. Greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide are released into the atmosphere primarily through factories, cars, buildings, and power plants. We need to reduce our releasing of greenhouse gases very soon, or irreversible damage will be done and already has been done to Earth and the atmosphere. Radio. The first radio was invented by Guglielmo Marconi in 1896, and in 1901 he completed the very first transatlantic communication through radio waves. Radios were originally used to communicate from long distances, but soon became a source of entertainment for people who could afford a radio. The golden age of radio began in the late 1920s, when radios began to be mass-produced and were becoming cheaper and more accessible, where by 1934, 60% of the nation's households owned a radio, as it was the cheapest form of entertainment before televisions. Now, radios are primarily used in automobiles to listen to music, as televisions and cell phones have taken over as the primary source of entertainment for families around the world. Television. The first television was invented in 1927 but it was not until the 1950s when televisions became popularized and accessible for most families in America. In America, the number of television sets in use rose from 6,000 in 1946 to around 12 million in 1951. Televisions replaced radios very quickly as the most accessible form of entertainment, as people around the world could easily tune in and watch sporting events or their favorite TV shows. Television as a medium currently reaches around 90% of adults per week, as it is one of the most popular ways to consume media. But as technology has improved over time and our phones become more and more capable, television seems to be on a decline as people rely on their phones more and more for all forms of media consumption. Cell phones. Cell phones were first invented in the early 1940s. The first phones were two-way radios used by emergency services to communicate. Many families had landlines leading up to the cellular revolution that began in the 90s. The cellular revolution began the mass production of mobile phones by companies like Motorola and Nokia. In the early 2000s, Apple revolutionized the way we see and use our mobile phones as they became much more capable to do more things than just contact others. Today, they can make calls as well as a variety of other.
Hello, we are Team 24, and today we are presenting the impact of information technology on cities, and specifically how this impacts the environment. The start of the Industrial Revolution in the mid-1700s marked a major change in the Earth's climate and a new geological time period. This entirely human-caused motion, executed through machines, factories, and especially the advent of computer technology in the 1950s, has led to many irreversible environmental changes. The featured image indicates the current landscape of southern Ontario and New England lit up at night, the outcome of centuries of infrastructure development and human technology. A significant consequence of the rise of information technology is increased electricity consumption. This is particularly reflected in the rise of internet users by a factor of 1,000 since 2007, as well as a rise in mobile devices which require electricity for charging. Each year, electricity demand increases by 16 to 20%. This in turn causes increased CO2 emissions and climate change, as there is still a large dependence on fossil fuels to generate electricity. IT has also led to a significant amount of waste from electronic hardware. Cities and countries such as India and China have markets entirely based on the recycling of electronic waste to recover precious metals and transistors. However, the workers who do so are exposed to noxious gases which can cause increased lead levels and even fatality. In this way, IT is negatively impacting the health of these communities with compromised economies. With ride-sharing companies such as Uber and Lyft becoming more prominent in today's major cities, there also comes the question of the impact this trend has on the environment. Some researchers, such as those from the University of California, Berkeley, have used IT to claim that ride-sharing has a positive impact, namely in more densely populated cities such as San Francisco, LA, and New York. They base their preliminary claims on the following. 1. That Uber and Lyft drivers are constrained to using newer vehicles, which are less pollutive than older cars. 2. That these companies promote sharing rides with other passengers, effectively reducing the amount of cars on the road. 3. That with more Uber and Lyft drivers, the demand for personally owning a car is inclined to decrease. And 4. That people may also be motivated to use public transit if a ride-sharing service is available at the stops. A counter-argument here is that those who take trips with Uber or Lyft are more often to go out than if this service was not available, hereby creating more of an environmental impact. Yet, information technology also has the potential to reverse its environmental impact. Current research initiatives aim to improve the way we use technology by measuring energy usage and using this to plan environmentally responsible neighborhoods. A notable example of this is Sidewalk Lab's contribution to the Waterfront Toronto project. It includes a generative design tool to enable users to design neighborhoods and view the corresponding environmental impact. In turn, planning departments and cities can better design environmentally friendly cities. Sidewalk Lab is also researching smart grid technology, which can enhance existing electrical distribution networks. This assesses the best way to deliver energy from its source to the consumer. Energy sources can range from nuclear or stable sources, hydro or swing sources, and renewable energy sources such as solar and wind, which are intermittent. Smart grid technology works to include intermittent energy sources whenever possible. In other words, it includes a multitude of power sources and reduces vulnerability points that improve upon the one plant per area model that is prominent in today's city infrastructure. Insight on AI in the context of the environment can be gained from electrical and computer engineering professor Mark Curley, who specifically researches AI and machine learning.
Like climate change is a big problem, right? To make progress on tackling climate change and improving our society, our response to it, you have to kind of break it down into kind of smaller components. So one thing people focus on is the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which have kind of very concrete, kind of different aspects and metrics and goals to address different things. And so the different goals listed in that way, you could imagine AI being used to kind of tackle different aspects of it, right? So most of those goals, you need to improve your ability to predict, weather or impacts of policies in society on the environment, or on our sustainable kind of energy usage. And so prediction and decision making and optimization are things that AI can help with. With forest fires specifically, we look at trying to build better models of predicting forest fire spread directly from satellite data, weather data, other data that's been collected to help improve on models that people have used. And AI can do that because it's good, taking in a lot of information and learning a new model and giving it predictions. It can also be used to make decisions. So if you give it the goals or the targets that you want to achieve, you can try to optimize the policy.
To conclude, smart technology is on its way to helping humans make better decisions when it comes to the environment and how we plan our cities, but only if we prioritize environmental impacts in the application of a given technology. Thank you for listening to our discussion. If you have any questions, feel free to comment them below.
Functions which are very useful. This caused a revolution in how we communicate. Airplanes. The very first airplane was invented and flown by the Wright brothers in 1903. Prior to World War I, airplanes were only used for transportation, but they were not a common way for people to get around the world quite yet. In the war, countries quickly realized how useful airplanes are in a war setting, which helped them become more mass-produced and accessible. Commercial airlines were not popularized as a mode of transportation until around the 1950s, when airlines in America began taking a step up in speed, comfort, and efficiency. Currently, airplanes are the most reliable, popular, and safest way to travel long distances, as U.S. commercial airports conduct around 6,000 flights per day.
People say this is political, and Tedros, you're a technical organization, don't say it. But if it's fueling the pandemic, and that's the very reason, why wouldn't I say it? At the end of the day, we should know the root cause of the problem and try to address that. It's fueling it. The cracks between people, between parties, is fueling it.
The head of the World Health Organization there warning that political divisions are fueling the pandemic. His comments come days after US President Donald Trump's criticism and decision to suspend funding to the body. Well, to better understand what's at the core of the ongoing debate and how we got here, CGTN's Roy Rottenberg takes a look at the founding of the WHO and its role over the years.
In 1945, at a meeting in San Francisco to create the United Nations, representatives from Brazil and China suggested a global health body to deal with global health concerns. 3 years later, the World Health Organization was born as a UN agency.
Over the decades, WHO teams have crossed continents to promote cross-border health cooperation. Now, a small but growing chorus of critics here in Washington is accusing the organization of having taken, quote, China's side in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic.
The WHO willingly took China's assurances to face value, and they took it just at face value, and defended the actions of the Chinese government, even praising China for its so-called transparency. I don't think so.
Last week, U.S. President Donald Trump announced he'd be pausing America's annual contribution to the WHO, around $400 million, pending a review. Top Democrats denounced the move as senseless, dangerous, and illegal. The WHO's chief called it regrettable.
COVID-19 does not discriminate between rich nations and poor, large nations and small. It does not discriminate between nationalities, ethnicities, or ideologies. Neither do we. This is a time for all of us to be united in our common struggle against a common threat.
Others were less diplomatic.
By cutting off WHO funding, Trump is committing a crime against humanity somewhere. The WHO is not only an organization fighting against COVID-19 and Ebola and major health emergencies. It's the international agency that works and makes treatment recommendations on AIDS, malaria, tuberculosis, chronic diseases, the whole range of global health issues and global health systems.
As a developing country, China's contribution to the WHO is around a tenth of Washington's, but that may be changing. China's assessed contribution, essentially its membership dues, went up nearly 20% this year, and Beijing recently pledged a voluntary contribution of $20 million to help in the global fight against COVID-19.
I think China and other member countries are going to step up. And also keep in mind, WHO peace funding, not just from sovereign countries, but also from contributions, donations from private entities as well.
In 2017, Beijing signed a cooperation agreement with the WHO to support its work through the China-led Belt and Road Initiative. Dubbed the Health Silk Road, it's now being put to use.
At this point, everything is all about saving lives, saving lives, saving lives. So we need to get this stuff out into those countries that are fighting against this virus, and also to those countries that are actually waiting for that to happen.
He agrees the American cuts are a setback, but not a dead end.
WHO is continuing to function, maybe not as effective as it used to be. With that, some of the programs will have to be slashed, but WHO is going to continue to function.
Rowie Ruttenberg, CGTN in Washington.
Vaccines. A vaccine is a dormant strain of a virus that is injected into your body to train your immune system to fight against that specific virus and make you immune. The world's very first vaccine was invented in 1798 as a solution to smallpox, when a man noticed that someone who had previously had cowpox could not catch smallpox. By 1940, science had improved enough where vaccines for multiple viruses could be mass-produced, although in the 1920s, the first vaccine was required at a school for smallpox. Over the past year, we went through a pandemic, and the reason that cases are finally going down is in part to the multiple vaccines that were produced that are now just becoming available for everyone who is able to receive a shot. Antibiotics. Antibiotics are a substance that is programmed to kill a certain bacterium. In the 1920s, British scientist Alexander Fleming was working in his laboratory at St. Mary's Hospital in London when almost by accident he discovered a naturally growing substance that could attack certain bacteria. The first actual usable and widespread antibiotic was penicillin, which was created in 1928. Antibiotics are now used for most forms of small illnesses, like a common cold, ear infections, or a sore throat. As time has passed, and as time goes on, antibiotics are becoming more and more effective as science improves. What was the extent to which science and technology brought change to the period from 1900 to the present? New technology has changed almost every aspect of how we live our lives. From the invention of the internet and cell phones to help communicate, to the advancements made in irrigation and farming, to the introduction to nuclear powers and other sources of reliable energy, and the inventions of antibiotics, the 21st century saw a plethora of changes from tech. These changes all contributed to making our lives easier and more convenient.